Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Shavua Tov, G'tvach. We are actually starting today a new Masechta in the tractate, Masechta Rosh Hashanah. Before we begin, I just wanted to mention that today's learning is in memory of Hinda Bas Moshe, dedicated by her granddaughter, Lara Hertz Saltzman, and also in memory of Esther Bas Pinchas, Esther Walken, sponsored by her children, Judy and Hy Waxman, Judy's brother, Paul Walken. The Neshamas should have an aliyah.
Amen. Amen.
Okay, so Perek Aleph Mishnah Aleph, chapter 1, Mishnah 1. Arba Rosh Hashanah Haim. There are 4 beginnings of the year. We, generally refer to the first day of Tishrei as Rosh Hashanah. We will get to that. But in actuality, there are 4 Rosh Hashanahs. There are 4 beginnings of the year. There are certain areas in halacha that we have to know when the year begins and when the year ends. And there are 4 times where we have to deal with knowing what is considered the beginning of the year. So the first thing mentioned is Be'echad B'Nisan Rosh Hashanah L'Malachim, or the Regalim. The first day of Nisan is Rosh Hashanah for kings and for holidays. Now, what does that mean for kings and for holidays? So for kings means that when they were Jewish kings, they used to date their documents by the years of the king. Like we date our years based on, the calendar, right? Our secular calendar. In the time when there was a Jewish king, the years were dated by the years of the king's reign. Mm-hmm. And the reason that it was important to know for legal documents, what year it was, is for the following. If the date recorded in a note of debt or in any other legal document that creates a debt, such as a marriage contract, whether it be an IOU, whether it be a ksuba, okay, if it comes out that the date noted in the document is earlier than the date when the debt was actually incurred, meaning if it says in the document that the debt was created earlier than it really was, that's a problem. Because that means then that the lien that comes about on a person's property for the debt that they have to pay actually started early, according to the document, was earlier than it really was. Now, the point of a lien is that if there's a lien on my property and I sell it to somebody else, if I don't pay the person I owe the money to, that person can go and take away that land that I sold to that other person because that person has a lien on it. But if the lien, but if what it says in the document, which is what we work with the system line below, if the document says that the lien took place because the debt took place earlier than it really did, which means the lien, is according to the document is took place before it did, that it comes out that I really may have had a right to sell that piece of land because there was no lien on it yet. But now, according to the document, it says that there is a lien on it. That's very problematic. And therefore, the halacha is that a document that has an early date than what really happened is invalid. Therefore, such documents must contain the exact date, which includes the year. So that's why we need to know years, because we need to count the years by knowing, again, what's the proper date for this document. So that's what it means, L'Malachim. The wording of the Mishnah is it's Rosh Hashanah at the beginning of the year for kings. What does it mean for kings? Here it means for Jewish kings. When you want to count the years of a Jewish king, you count it based on the year starting at Rosh Hashanah. At Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the beginning of Nisan. Now, so for example, if let's say it comes out that if we say that you count the years starting from Rosh Chodesh Nisan, well, what happened if he became king in Shvat? He became king in Shvat. 2 months, but let's just as an example. He became a king 2 months before, Rosh Chodesh, before the beginning of Rosh Chodesh Nisan, right? So when after 2 months of being king, and you now hit Rosh Chodesh Nisan, how many years are counted for his reign? 2. He started before, and now he got into year 2. So Rosh Chodesh Nisan is always considered the beginning of the year when it comes counting the years of the king. The next thing that the Mishnah says is that the first of Nisan is the beginning of the year for regalim, for holidays. What does that mean? What is it? So, I mean, what it says is we count the regalim, we count the holidays starting from Rosh Chodesh Nisan, right? What's the point of that? What's the point of that? The answer is, the point is like this. Someone who vows to bring an offering, bring a carbon, but does not do so until after Shalosh Regalim, after the 3 times that you have to come to the Beis HaMikdash, which is Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. If he made a vow and those 3 holidays have passed, he now transgresses a lav, a prohibition of the Torah. You may not delay what you vowed to bring. Now, the Mishnah is teaching that the count of the 3 festivals begins in Nisan. That is the beginning of Pesach, which falls in Nisan. See, it's not really the first of Nisan is the Rosh Hashanah for Regalim. Pesach is really the beginning. We call it the beginning of the year because it's the month of Nisan. So you're going to be counting from Nisan through Tishrei, so to speak. But the real point is you're going through the 3 holidays themselves. Okay? When the Mishnah says the new year for festivals, actually means the 15th of Nisan. Thus, if he made the vow shortly before Pesach, the count of the 3 festivals begins that very Pesach. And he violates the prohibition when the next Sukkot ends 7 months later. Right? That's what happens. However, if he made the vow shortly after Pesach, the count does not begin until the Pesach of the following year, because you're always counting starting from Pesach. And he does not violate the prohibition until the Sukkot after that Pesach, some 19 months later. So it all depends on when you make that vow, and the count of the 3, that if you miss those, if you pass 3 of those, that you and now have transgressed the prohibition of Baal Ta'acher, of delaying your fulfillment of a vow, that always starts from Nisan, it always starts from Pesach. Next. The Echad ve'Elul Rosh Hashanah l'Maaseh Behema. On the 1st of Elul is the beginning of the year for the tithing of animals. Okay, now, tithing of animals means that every year, when it comes to the new flock that is the new flock that is born, whether it's we're talking about from cattle, sheep, goats, right? The new flock every year has to be tithed. That means you have to take 1/10 of it and you bring it as a carbon, the Beis HaMikdash, and it's for you, whoever you invite. Now, the way this, how do you take 1/10 off of these animals? The answer is you bring them into a pen, to a very narrow pen. You let them out one at a time. And when number 10 passes by, you take a staff that has some kind of like an ink on it, and you give it a tap. And now you know that is the animal, that is the 10th that now becomes sanctified. Now, the point of knowing years is the following. The owner must make sure that all the animals in the pen were born in the same year, because an animal born in one year cannot be used to fulfill the mice obligation that applies to animals born in another year. You can't say, oh, I'll take this animal from this year and use it for and cover an animal from a different year. You can't do that. You have to, the 10th has to be the animal from that year. Now, again, what's the year? How do you count the year? From when do you count the year? And that's what the Mishnah says. The Mishnah teaches us that for this purpose, the year begins on the 1st of Elul. Thus, animals born on or after the 1st of Elul must be tied separately from the animals born before that date. You can't combine them together or have one, can't combine them together and count the 10th, or you can't, maybe you think you could take from one year to cover another year. Doesn't work that way. You have to know what year it's from. Those animals go by themselves. The other animals go by themselves. Born before Elul is 1 year. Born after Rosh Chodesh Elul is the other year. Next, Rebbe Lezer, Rebbe Shimon Oimrim. Rebbe Lezer, the sages, Rebbe Lezer, Rebbe Shimon say, Be'echa b'Tishrei, the Rosh Hashanah for the Meiser Behema, for tithing the animals, is the first day of Tishrei. Next, Be'echa b'Tishrei, the first of Tishrei. Excuse me. Rosh Hashanah l'Shanim. It's the beginning of the year for years. What years? Here it means for the years of a non-Jewish king. If we're talking about having to count the years of a document by a non-Jewish king, A non-Jewish king, we count his years by the beginning by the first of Tishrei. The Jewish kings are counted from the first of Nisan. That's based on a pasuk in Tanakh. While when it comes to the non-Jewish kings, we count the years by the first day of Tishrei. The first day of Tishrei is also Rosh Hashanah, La Shmitin V'la Yovelos, when it comes to the laws of Shemitah and Yovel. So again, every seventh year, it is biblically forbidden to sow, plow, or otherwise work the land of Eretz Yisrael. This law also applies every 50th year, the Yovel year, the Jubilee year, which is the year that immediately follows 7 Shemitah cycles. The Mishnah teaches us that the years of Shemitah and Yovel begin on the first of Tishrei. That is how you calculate the years for Shemitah and for Yovel. If they begin on the first day of Tishrei, which, if you're talking about after 49 years, you have Yovel, that means you're going to have 2 years in a row, year 49, year 50, that you will not be able to work the land. Next, and the beginning of Tishrei is also Rosh Hashanah, L'Netia V'Yerakas. Netia means for saplings and for tithing vegetables. Now, what does it mean that it's Rosh Hashanah for saplings? That means that we have a halacha called Arla. Arla means if you plant a tree, the first 3 years of the tree, the fruits are forbidden to partake from them. So now, in regard to this law, the new year starts on the first of Tishrei. Okay, you want to know how to count the years of Arla? It works with the first of Tishrei. Now, this is very important to know. If a tree was planted at least 45 days before the first of Tishrei, remember that number? At least 45 days before Tishrei, it begins its second year on that date. So if you plant your tree 45 days before Tishrei, and then Tishrei comes, once you hit Tishrei, you're in year number 2 of Arla. It doesn't have to be 3 full years necessarily. It has to be 3 years. How do you count the years? The Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the year, is the first of Tishrei. Now, why does it have to be 45 days beforehand? The answer is, these 45 days are required because a tree needs 14 days to take root. And until then, it is not considered to be truly planted. The next 30 days are necessary because that is the minimum length of time that can be reckoned as 1 year for this purpose, according to the halachically accepted view. For the purpose of Arla, in order you want to count less than a year than a year, you have to have at least 30 days. So you need 15 days to know that, or you need basically, you're going to need 14 days to be able to have it take root, and then you're going to have a month in order to make sure that it was growing for a month to be able to consider it as if it was to consider it like a year. Therefore, if you have those days, that number of days, 45 days before beginning of Tishrei, once Tishrei comes, that's year number 2. Now we also say L'Yerakas. We're talking about for vegetables, right? The beginning of Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah for vegetables. What does that mean? So it means like this. It means we know that when you have new produce, you have to separate Truma, right? The first when you have your new produce, you got to separate a certain amount, according to Torah law, whatever amount, for the Kohen. What's left from that? You take Meiser. You take a 10th, you give it to the Levi. And then you take another 10th from what's left afterwards. And depending on the year of the cycle of Shemitah, either it's Meiser Sheni that you have to take to Yerushalayim to eat, or give it onto money, take the money to Yerushalayim to eat, or you have to give it to the poor. That's either Meiser Sheni or Meiser Ani. Now, you have to go ahead. The produce of each year must be dealt with separately, because produce of 1 year cannot be designated as Truma or Meiser for the produce of another year. The Mishnah teaches that the year for vegetables begins on the first of Tishrei, meaning we know that if, let's say, you have 2 piles of grain, right? You could actually take off, and if I want to take Truma from 1 pile of grain for another. So 1 pile of grain, I'm going to leave it alone. I'll be able to eat it all, and I want to separate whatever needs to be separated from 1 pile for the other pile. Can I do that? Yes, I can. Only on one condition. They're from the same year. They have to be from the same year. So the Mishnah says, how do you count the year for tithing vegetables? We're specific about vegetables right now. How do you know when does the year begin? It begins the first day of Tishrei. What has to happen to be considered that it already, had it? But good. So what we say Tishrei is the beginning of the year for the vegetables. And in regard to what? What did you do to the vegetables? What happened to the vegetables to know that which year they belong in? And the answer is when we're dealing with vegetables follow when they're picked. If they're picked before Tishrei, they belong to the year before. If they're picked after Rosh Chodesh Tishrei, the first of Tishrei, they belong to the second year. So that's why you need to know what the year is and when it was picked. Another reason why we need to know the date of the new year is that the law of Meiser sometimes changes from year to the next, right? As we said, so the third and sixth year, you have 2 years of Meiser Sheni, 1 year of Meiser Ani. Well, you got to know which year it's from to know what to do with it. Is it Meiser Sheni? Is it Meiser Ani? So again, what was picked before, if let's say it's the second year of the cycle, right? Now, if you pick that vegetable before the coming Rosh Chodesh Tishrei, it belongs to the second year, and it's Meiser Sheni. If we were to pick it after Tishrei, it would belong to the third year and it would be Meiser Ani. It goes to the poor. So these are the reasons why you need to know when the year is, and it's determined by when it was picked. Now the Mishnah continues, Be'echa b'Shvat, the first day of the month of Shvat, Rosh Hashanah Le'ilam. That is considered the Rosh Hashanah for a tree. What does that mean for a tree? That means when you're dealing with the new fruits and we're dealing with the same issues how about the vegetable, right? What year does it belong to? What year is it part of? When it comes to a tree, when it comes to fruit of a tree, you determine that by the beginning of Shvat. And what has to happen before Shvat to know which year it belongs in? The answer to that is, let's wait, get it here. One may not designate the fruit that emerged on a tree from the first of Shvat as a truma of meiser, a fruit that emerged afterwards. Unlike vegetables, which are classified by the year in which they are picked, fruit is classified by the year in which the flower falls off and the fruit begins to emerge in its place. That's called chanata. The flower, chanata, it's called. The flower falls off, the fruit begins to emerge. That is now considered that's going to determine whether this thing has begun to grow in which year. If this takes place before Rosh Hashanah, before the first of Tishrei, it's going to belong to the previous year. If it takes place after, the first of Shvat, not first of Tishrei, first of Shvat. If it takes place before the first of Shvat, it belongs to 1 year. If it takes place after Shvat begins, it belongs to the next year. So again, Echad b'Shvat, on the first of Shvat, Rosh Hashanah Le'ilan, is Rosh Hashanah, is the beginning of the year for trees. Kedivrei Beis Shammai, according to the words of Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel say, the Academy of Hillel said, B'chamisha asar bai. It follows the 15th of Shvat, as we call it, Tu B'Shvat. Tu B'Shvat, the 15th of Shvat, Beis Hillel says, is how you determine which year the fruits of the tree belong to. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, so